evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our April Core Advocates webinar. Tonight, we're going to be talking about supporting English language learners with college and career-ready content. We're going to wait just a couple of more minutes to get started so we can ensure that everyone has the opportunity to get logged on to their computers and settled in. But while we're waiting, we're going to post a poll that we would like you to respond to. That gives us a better understanding of who is on the webinar with us tonight. So we will be starting very shortly. Thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. And once again, thank you for joining us for the April Core Advocates webinar. We're excited to have all of you on with us tonight. We're going to go ahead and close out this poll and get started with tonight's webinar. It looks like from the results of our poll, we have quite a significant number of you on the webinar for it's your first webinar, so welcome. We're very excited to have you joining us tonight, and we're excited to share some great information with you regarding supporting English language learners with college and career-ready content. So my name is Joni Funderburk, and I work on the Field Impact team at Student Achievement Partners. The rest of my team is hosting with me tonight. Linda Nguyen and Jenny Beltramini, Janelle Fan, and Sandra Alberti are all here. And we are very excited to also welcome two guest presenters tonight. So online you'll be hearing tonight from Claire Rivero, who is our Digital Strategy Manager here at Student Achievement Partners, and she's been the project lead on the ELL adaptation project we've been working on that we're showcasing on tonight's webinar. And we're also joined by one of our great core advocates, Sarah Webb. Sarah is the ELL and Curriculum Support Specialist at Mad River Local Schools in Ohio, and they both have a great deal of knowledge and information that they're going to share with you tonight. So for all of you that are on the Core Advocates webinar for the first time, you might not have heard of Core Advocates. We are a national group of educators who believe in the potential of high-quality standards and their ability to prepare all students for college and careers, and who are eager to share this support network within their colleagues and communities so that all folks can better understand and advocate for college and career-ready standards. And they embrace what we call the shifts in instruction that are required by the new standards. If you'd like to learn more about Core Advocates, if you haven't heard about us before and you'd like to learn more about us, there are a couple ways you can do that. You can email Jenny or me directly. Our emails are here on the slide, and you'll receive a copy of this presentation after the webinar, so you'll be able to just click on those to email us. We also have a survey that you can complete to join our database and mailing lists, or you can just visit our website to learn more about the Core Advocates program. Core Advocates are avid tweeters and appreciate the opportunity to share their learning across social media networks. So if you are a tweeter, we would encourage you to tweet during the webinar or after the webinar tonight. We use hashtag Core Advocates. And we encourage you to follow us and tag us on your tweets at Achieve the Core, at Joni Fun. All of our Twitter handles are here. So we hope that you will tag all of us and follow us so that we can all share and learn from one another. During tonight's webinar, we're going to ask you to engage with us a couple of different ways. We have handouts, and you can access those by clicking on that handout tab of your control panel on the right-hand side, and then you can just click on the handout to download it. We also will be asking you to engage with us by answering some of our questions, and any time during the webinar, you're more than welcome to ask questions that come up for you, and you just do that by typing them into that box under questions. And then as you saw at the beginning, we'll also engage you in a couple of polls, and those will just pop up on your screen for you to click on and engage with. Shortly after tonight's webinar, you'll receive a survey. We really appreciate the feedback that you share with us, and we use that feedback each month to improve our webinars to better meet your needs. And a couple days from now, you will also receive access to the webinar recording. It'll have the full video and audio of tonight's webinar, as well as all of the resources involved, the slide deck presentation and handouts that were used for tonight. So we hope that you'll look forward to those things. So let's go ahead and get into the content for tonight's webinar. We have three goals tonight. We hope that as a result of attending this webinar, you'll learn more about Student Achievement Partners' recent work to adapt resources for instruction with English language learners. We're going to take you through some specific ideas for ELL instruction in both literacy and math. And then we'll also share some additional resources besides our recent project that are available to help you support ELLs in their college and career-ready instruction. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Claire now, who's going to kind of set the stage for us about why this project was launched in the first place. So Claire, it's all you.
Thanks, Joni, and thank you everyone for joining tonight. This is work that we have been doing for over a year, and I think it's likely that a lot of you who are on the call have played a part in this work in some way, either by providing feedback or giving us survey information about how you want to see these supports embedded into resources. So thank you to everyone who has participated and made this work possible, and I'm really excited to share the outcomes with you tonight. And I just want to give you a little heads up. We have packed this webinar full. It is full of math, ELA adaptation information, and scaffolds. And we also have interactive activities. So a little heads up that we are hoping that you will certainly ask your questions as they come to you, but we'll probably get to them at the end of the webinar. We won't be able to answer them in real time. But let's get into it. So I wanted to start by framing the whole webinar with a concept that underpinned all of our work on the English Language Learner project. And that's that college and career ready instruction is for all students. And I think there's a really big difference between saying that and actually making that happen, making that a reality. So it's one thing to say that it's for all students and then, cross your fingers and say I have high expectations and I'm an optimistic person and I think my English language learners can do it. That's not setting them up for success. We know that there are research-based scaffolds and supports that we can do in the classroom to make our college and career ready content accessible for English language learners. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So Sarah's going to kick us off with some information about the shift. Take it away, Sarah.
Thanks, Claire. So just to piggyback on that about the reality of the classroom, and what we're all experiencing with these shifts. So I work in a district with a rapidly growing ELL population. We've had about 500% growth in the last 5 years. And I've worked with grades 3 through 8 as a classroom teacher, an ELL teacher, and a coach. So I've seen how each of these shifts that we're making, especially in our ELA instruction, offers particular challenges for our ELL students. First, the complexity and rigor of the text has been raised considerably, as we're all aware. My 8th graders are currently reading Shakespeare, and you can see that little face that I put up there of how they feel about that. We know these texts can cause our grade level readers to stumble, but the complex grammar and academic vocabulary are exceptionally difficult for our ELLs. Second, the classrooms have shifted to involve a great deal of attention to speaking and writing, and all of this has to be grounded in evidence. So our ELLs have to be able to apply complex academic language themselves. Finally, the classrooms are reading a great deal of nonfiction, which we all know can be full of that academic vocabulary, unique text structures, and features. I've often heard it said that ELLs are doing twice as much work as other students, but sometimes it seems like 10 to 15 would be a more accurate guess. However, we also know how important it is that we meet the needs of all our students, and that's why we're all here tonight. And what has become really clear to me is that my students are extremely capable of meeting these demands. We just need to figure out, what is the best way to make this content accessible. Last week, one of my 8th grade newcomers used a word bank to write an accurate summary of Act 1 of A Midsummer's Night Dream. This was not magic, but purposeful planning and scaffolding from the teachers. Instead of watering down the curriculum, which has been our instinct at some times, we need to find the resources to pull them up to the grade level target. And it's inspiring to see this expectation shifting in teachers, and it's exciting to share all these resources that Student Achievement Partners has developed to help us.
Thanks, Sarah. So now I'd like to ask you a question. What has been your biggest hurdle to supporting your English language learners? Please use the box on the screen to answer the question. Well, it looks like outpacing the others by far, lack of access to guidance or resources that support ELLs seems to be the biggest hurdle.
Great or not great. I think that is something that we saw from a lot of teachers that we surveyed. And we actually saw a pretty even split among the teachers that we surveyed at the outset, that all of those factors were an issue for them in implementing their college and career ready curriculum with their English language learners. But this is an example of a question that we gave at the outset of our work to really scope the parameters of what we were going to try and cover, to ask teachers right at the outset, what is impeding you from implementing college and career ready instruction with your English language learners, to ensure that we could design adaptations and scaffolds that really met the needs that they were experiencing in real time in the classroom. But I want to take a little bit of a step back and tell you how we built our knowledge about English language learners. So for one, we started with teacher surveys, and they answered questions like the one that you just answered. They also answered questions about design preferences. So thinking about how they already saw scaffolds and guidance included in their existing materials. What did they like about that? What would they like to see differently? Where would they like to see it placed? Questions like that. And we got a lot of good actionable information from teachers on those issues. We also conducted a pretty extensive literature review on the latest research and existing criteria about what works for English language learners and instruction for English language learners. And we made connections between those actions and the goals of our resources so that we could figure out which adaptations we wanted to implement. And lastly, we had conversations with ELL experts who gave us feedback throughout the process, as well as partners who have engaged in similar work and could share some lessons learned with us. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the outcomes of our work. We're going to be focusing today on the adaptations of our resource collections, and we're going to dig into those in just a second. But I also wanted to highlight some of the other outcomes. One is an annotated bibliography, and that's not quite live yet, so please be watching our social media and sign up for our emails to make sure you get information on when this is live. But this is an annotated bibliography that includes all of the research that really underpinned all of the adaptation choices we made. And they include the citation and then also a quick summary of the findings of that particular study or that particular set of criteria. And then to accompany that, we are going to have annotated exemplars that make the connection between those research-based strategies and what those actually look like in instructional materials. So we'll have annotated lessons and exemplars that show that connection. We also, in the context of doing the adaptation work, realized that some additional guidance documents would be helpful. Guidance documents that didn't just apply to our particular resources, but could be applied to many different curricula and instructional materials. So as we were doing the adaptations, we would sometimes call out a particular classroom move, like using a juicy sentence, and we got feedback that teachers really wanted more scripted guidance, more examples, more structured guidance on how to implement these kind of adaptations. So there are a number of guidance documents that I'll go through at the end of the presentation that fit that criteria and can be used with any curriculum. And lastly, we're going to be starting to curate a lot more college and career-ready English language learner resources. In the context of learning from our partners and learning from ELL experts, we got to see a lot of great resources that are already out there, already built and existing on the web. So we're going to be sharing a lot more of those with you through our social media and our emails. So to give you an idea of the goals that we went into this project with, these are sort of questions we would ask ourselves each time we considered whether an adaptation was relevant to our resource collection, relevant to our work. So the first is, of course, to give English language learners access to grade level content. And so we always, when we were thinking about the adaptation, we would think about what is the impediment to the student engaging deeply with the resource and with the activity, and is this adaptation actually helping them overcome that impediment? And then secondly, we wanted to create adaptations that could realistically be used within a whole class setting. We want to minimize the extra work that a teacher would need to do in a classroom, or the separate work that they would need to do with their English language learners. And this is in direct response to some of the feedback we got about the struggles that teachers were having in the classroom. Many teachers, and I think you'll probably recognize these concerns and these struggles yourself, that they're alone in the classroom. They do not have an ELL specialist working with them. They've received very little training or professional development around supporting English language learners, and maybe they don't even have an aide in the classroom. There's no one to do breakout sessions. They're trying to teach within a whole class setting. So we wanted to make sure that the adaptations that we included were feasible to use in a setting like that. And lastly, we wanted to remain true to the purpose of each resource that we were adapting. So a good example of this is mini assessments. So I think with any resource, you could include hundreds of different scaffolds. I think anyone who's done a quick Google of supporting English language learners knows what's out there. But not all scaffolds are equally effective and equally appropriate for different resources. So for mini assessments, it wouldn't be appropriate to include group work, group discussion, things that would entail students working together when this is intended to be independent assessment work. So here's a quick rundown of the updated tools and resources. So this does not include the extra guidance documents, which I'll get to at the end, but these are all of our existing resource collections that we've now updated. The ones that are hyperlinked are available now. As soon as you get off this webinar, you can go explore and see them for yourself. And then the ones in black are still in production, but they should be available by the summer. So keep an eye out for these, and I wish I could go through all of them tonight, but we can't, so we're just going to touch on a couple for ELA and a couple for math to hopefully give you a taste, and then you can explore more for yourself. So I wanted to run through our adaptation model so you have a sense of how we came up with these adaptations. So we started with a principle, an idea of what we thought English language learners were capable of and what they should be doing in the college and career-ready classroom. So in this example, we see that we want English language learners to have regular opportunities to work with complex text. So then from that, we went to a supporting action. How do we make that possible? In this instance, one of the ways we can make that possible is to engage with a read aloud or a choral reading or some opportunity for a student to hear the text read aloud before they're expected to read it aloud or work with it independently. And this is based, as all of our supporting actions are, on research. And this particular research base is around listening comprehension. And I think, you can read the research base, but anyone who is working actively with English language learners probably knows that it's most common that students can comprehend, they can understand a lot more than they can read, say, or write. So giving them this foundation of hearing something read aloud really gives them a leg up on working with the text independently. So then we take it to the third level, which is an adaptation that's specific to a resource collection. In this instance, we're talking about fluency packets. So how can we include a read aloud option within fluency packets when students are frequently working with a passage alone and teachers don't have the capacity to work independently with students? And the answer there was to include audio recordings with each passage. So now we're going to start actually digging into some of the adaptation work so you can see some of the examples, see some of the things that you'll see in our adaptations, and also that you could replicate with your own materials. We're going to start with fluency packets. If you're not familiar with our fluency packets, they are split up by grade band, and they have 40 passages in each, which is enough for about one per week, which is intentional. We envision that you would work with one passage per week, and each day you would work with a different component of fluency. And this is particularly useful for English language learners who struggle with the components of fluency, like decoding, pronunciation, word identification, and prosody or expression. So this gives them ample opportunities to really build day after day increasing mastery of the fluency of a particular passage. So here we're going to walk through one by one some of the adaptations that we have made to a fluency packet. So the first one I mentioned already, the audio recordings. This gives students the opportunity to hear the passage read aloud and to continue to hear it, play it back in certain parts to go over things that they're struggling with, to hear a word pronounced again. There's a lot of uses for audio recordings. We also added a notes column. This was in direct response to teacher feedback and a teacher request. And she said one of her biggest struggles was in working with complex text is having her students reading them either in readers or in classroom copies of text that they couldn't annotate. And annotation is very important for English language learners, whether they're annotating in their own language writing notes to themselves about pronunciation, writing clues about what passages mean. So this is something that we thought would be very helpful in helping students work and make meaning from text. We also added student-friendly definitions for key vocabulary, because if you're going to read a passage with appropriate expression, you need to understand what you're reading, and the student-friendly vocabulary can help with that. And then I'm not going to touch too much here on the juicy sentences because I'm getting to that later, but for each passage we also included a juicy sentence, which is one that is ripe for unpacking, ripe for discussion in each passage. And lastly, we included line numbers. This is great for assessing fluency and also for helping students navigate a passage. And so asking them, go back to line 5, and why don't you try rereading that one again? Great for navigation when you're working with fluency. So here's an example of the protocol that's included in each packet, and you can see that's hyperlinked there if you want to go see this in a packet. But steps 1 through 7, this is intended for whole class instruction, and we have embedded within this whole class 1 through 7 English language learner best practices. And then in addition to that, and so we think for 1 through 7 that these additional things that we've embedded are actually beneficial to the whole class. These are not just things that are beneficial to English language learners. The green boxes are things specifically for English language learners if they're struggling with the components in 1 through 7, if they need a little more support. And now Sarah's going to talk about our Read Aloud project.
All right, so I'm going to talk about the Read Aloud project, which is also available on Achieve the Core. These are week-long units for grades K to 2, centered around a high-quality Read Aloud book. The units each emphasize text-dependent questions, improve speaking, listening, and writing tasks, and a focus on academic vocabulary. There are about 130 units available online. You can see some of the titles that are available throughout the slides. Each Read Aloud unit also includes ideas for activities and extensions that can be used to dive deeper into the book. So for this project, we looked closely and highlighted 1 or 2 activities for each book that would be especially effective for ELLs based on the research guiding principles that Claire referenced. So again, these are they're picked specifically for the books, but they're also general enough that you could use these ideas with any book that you're working on in your classroom. And they're really helpful for ELL students, but it's not like it's something you would do just extra for those kids. It would be beneficial for all of your students. So the first principles that we're going to look at is engaging students in reading supplemental text and resources on the topic. So if you're reading a nonfiction book such as Spiders, encouraging students to continue building their background knowledge and vocabulary of this topic by reading other texts and watching videos is really helpful. We know that the repetition of thematic reading helps cement that learning for all students and especially ELLs. Similarly, finding different ways to engage students in rereading of the text, whether it's through reader's theater, reenactments, fluency practice, searching for something like sensory language, as you could do with some of the books shown here, or other books that you're using in your room already. The meaningful repetition and interaction with the text are key to help the students. And then the next set of activities focuses on helping students to internalize the vocabulary of the text. These are all complex texts with lots of rich vocabulary, and we know we want to help our students develop and broaden their language proficiency. So we look for ways that they could explore the vocabulary in the book, whether through sorting, classifying, making connections, and then whenever possible through applying the words themselves in writing or speaking. So for example, having a word bank or word wall that you display throughout the book for them to use, and then encouraging them constantly to use those words, creating opportunities like observing and describing a plant that you're working on, or creating something that has to do with the book and then having them describe it to a partner using the words from the text. Those are all things that just give them the more opportunities they have to use those words in a meaningful way, the more likely it is that they'll be able to add it to their, just regular daily vocabulary. And then the last thing that we looked at was writing activities that could be really beneficial for ELLs. So This included graphic organizers to help students make sense of the text as they're reading. With nonfiction, graphic organizers are a great way to keep track of important facts learned. Students can then turn that information into writing. So it just helps them to process it from the book into their writing. We often recommend providing sentence frames to explicitly model how to take the notes from the graphic organizer and turn it into an academic style of writing. So, for example, if students take notes on the animal characteristics in If You Could Go to Antarctica, which you can see on the screen, they could then use a frame such as a blank is unusual because, and write what they've learned from the book. So lastly, we want to make sure the activities are meaningful and that they allow students to make connections to their own life and interests, and then also demonstrate the growing knowledge that they're getting from all of this rich nonfiction. And we hope that some of those ideas you'll be able to use in your own classroom. So we have a poll for you. So which one of these adaptations do you think you could add to your literacy instruction tomorrow? Supplementary text to build background knowledge, vocabulary practice activities, graphic organizers, or maybe all of them?
All right. Usually we wait longer, but we actually have about 86% of the audience responding. And it looks like all of the above is the runaway winner.
All right, well, we're going to switch to math, but great job on being enthusiastic. I love that the 76% was all of these. That's fantastic. And hopefully, as you hear more about them and see some of the examples within the resources themselves, that'll give you some more examples of how to use them with your own curriculum. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit to math tasks. If you're not familiar with our math task collection, they are K-12 tasks. They're aligned to college and career-ready standards, and they are great for both classroom use and for professional learning because they include not only the task itself, which is student-facing, but also a lot of commentary, annotation, and background information for teachers about what makes the task align, what makes it good for student learning. So we've done a lot with these tasks. I'm going to walk you through the different components that we've added. The first is a new language component within the within the teacher-facing guidance. And this outlines all of the words that we think might be an impediment to students interacting and engaging with the task. So this includes both the mathematical language and just everyday words that might be confusing to them or might make it difficult for them to understand what's being asked of them. We also have a new feature for teachers that explains, in addition to what makes the task aligned and what makes it good for students, what makes this task good, especially for English language learners. And we outline those components for you. So now I'm going to walk you through an adapted task and walk you through the different components of what we changed about a task. And hopefully this will give you an example of the kinds of things you'll see in our resource and also the kind of changes that you may be able to make in items within your own curriculum. So firstly, we try to clarify the wording of the task itself. So in this particular task, it's very important for students to understand the difference between 1 cup and 1 serving. If you don't understand that difference, you're not going to be able to solve the problem. And before, it was worded in a little bit of a complex way where it's kind of hidden, and we just wanted to make that explicit so that students could refer back to it, that information that they needed. We also clarified the structure of the task itself. So it is a conversation between two girls, and we didn't want to take away that component. We didn't want to oversimplify and take away the component of conversation. And we actually, in the teacher guidance, recommend that an additional scaffold that you might employ is having students act out the conversation between the two girls. But we wanted to make sure that especially English language learners could follow one particular speaker and analyze her claim. So we focused on Tanya, and so it was very clear what Tanya said, and then we asked them to analyze Tanya's position, her idea. Was this correct or incorrect? And this allowed us to include an instructional mathematical routine called Decide and Defend, and we're going to look at that in just a second. And we also included, as Sarah was talking about, a sentence frame, which really helps students structure their response and have access and entry point into what the task is asking. So I mentioned that instructional routine. It's a mathematical language routine called Decide and Defend. And mathematical language routines are structured but adaptable formats for essentially using language to talk about math. And it's very important for English language learners and for all students that they have opportunities not just to solve problems and put a number down on a piece of paper, but actually describe what they're doing, describe what they're thinking. And that really helps them build their conceptual understanding and their overall language ability. So here's the actual routine itself, and I've annotated it to explain a couple of the different components of it that make it especially helpful for English language learners. So the first one is that there are multimodal ways of thinking about a concept. So first you ask the students to read the problem, think about the problem themselves, come up with their own solution. Is Tanya right or wrong? Then there's the opportunity to talk with a partner. This is great for rehearsal time, so you might have a same language pair, same native language pair. And this gives them an opportunity to rehearse what they're going to say, to think about it with a partner before they're asked to contribute to a whole class discussion, which can be extremely intimidating for a non-native speaker. But then after they've had that time to talk through with a partner, then they move on to the public recording part of the task where they are speaking in front of the whole class, hearing what others say, and then having someone write, either the teacher or another student, do a public recording so they actually see thoughts written out about the problem. There's also use of visuals, color, and annotations, which is an ELL best practice. But most importantly, this offers an opportunity for students to be talking about the math that they're doing. This is an opportunity for them to have this sort of metacognitive way of describing, so not only solving the problem, but taking a step back and thinking, how did I get to this solution, and how do I convey my solution method and my belief in why this is right or wrong to someone else. So now we're going to talk about math mini assessments, which is another one of our collections. We have mini assessments for grades 2 through 12. They reflect the demands of college and career ready standards. They can be completed in one period. They include an answer key. And like the tasks, they're great for immediate classroom use. You can print them out and use them tomorrow, or they're also great for professional learning because they have that annotation and background information for the teacher. So with our math mini assessments, we employed a couple of strategies that we did that are similar to what you saw in the math tasks. We included a vocabulary section, and we split it out into mathematical terminology and mathematical concepts, which students will need to have encountered if they're going to be successful in understanding the items within a mini assessment. And we've also highlighted tier 2 words and additional vocabulary, which might serve as a barrier to students understanding the individual items. And then lastly, again, we've included sentence frames, which help students, particularly newcomers, structure responses. The main thing that we focused on with our mini assessments, though, is increasing the clarity of math items, particularly with an assessment, but really with any resource that you put in front of your English language learner. You want it to be really clear in what it's asking. And as we reflected on how our mini assessment items were written, we realized there was a lot we could do to improve the clarity of items, not only for English language learners, but for everyone taking the assessment. And here is an example. So if we look at the before, the item says, locate 5/4 by placing a mark on the number line diagram below. So a couple of problems with that. First, place a mark is not mathematical language, so it's not reinforcing the correct mathematical terminology. And it could also be confusing. Mark is kind of unusual language. So we switched that to the actual mathematical term, which is a point. And then we encourage teachers to use a visual glossary to illustrate what a point is. And you see that on the right-hand side. And then within the problem itself, we illustrate what it means to put a point on a number line. We say point A is on the number line diagram. So now they see what it means to have a point on a number line. And then lastly, we ask the student to perform the work of placing a point. Place instead of locate is a more straightforward way of saying it. Locate implies you're looking for something, that you're trying to locate it, and there is nothing on the number line. You actually need to be placing a point on the line. So we want to be explicit in what we were looking for. And now Sarah's going to talk a little bit about increasing clarity.
All right, so first I'm just going to give you a moment to read these two questions. So you've probably noticed that the questions are very similar. So that's what we'd like you to think about. Which one of these questions do you think is clearer for ELLs, and why do you think so? So in the question tab, you can go ahead and answer that question if you think A or B is clearer, and why.
Responses. We're getting lots of B responses, a few A's. B doesn't have unnecessary words. The language is clear, more specific vocabulary, simpler vocabulary. Some people are saying A is clearer in the task. Concise vocabulary in B. Let's see if I can see some more. A is easier to understand, but lots of responses. I would say primarily people selected B.
So that's really interesting and is a great example of how tricky this can be and how tricky it can be to really think about what will be challenging to English language learners. Because we were really thinking that A is the question that is better clarified, is more clear. The first few sentences are primarily identical, but A says Rob has 6 water tables, which is actually a little bit more clear than tables to use for water. Similarly, saying the distance between water tables is the same is more straightforward for an English language learner than saying he will spread the water tables out evenly, because they might not understand what that means. And then the question, as I heard you say, someone did notice, the question is much clearer about what you actually need to figure out. How far apart is the distance between water tables 1 and 2? In B, it's not clear. We know there's 6 tables, and it's not really clear which exactly what we're trying to do. So A actually is much more specific, and it helps the student see the actual math that they need to do and interpret the question. So hopefully that cleared that up a little bit, and we have more examples, and we're going to share some additional resources available to support ELLs.
All righty. So we have a couple of additional guidance documents that are now available on Achieve the Core, and the URLs are at the bottom of each of these pages, so you can go download them or print them for yourselves. But the first one is a mathematical instructional routine quick reference document. And I talked about those routines when we were talking about math tasks, and we've embedded a routine into every math task that we have updated. But we also have this document that includes routines that we have curated from a couple of different sources that you can apply to any of your own items within your own curriculum. And we also created a juicy sentence protocol. So juicy sentence is something that I flagged for you in the fluency packet section of the presentation. And juicy sentences are sentences that are rich in meaning, vocabulary, and their grammatical, punctuation, sentence structure, the features that make them a really interesting, robust sentence. And if you look at the example here that's on the slide, this is actually a sentence that is included in a read aloud that is intended for kindergartners, which might be hard to believe. But if you go into our juicy sentence protocol, you'll actually find a link to a video that shows kindergarten English language learners unpacking this sentence using this vocabulary in context. It's pretty amazing. So please, if you don't even want to look at the protocol, go watch that video because it's pretty inspiring. But here, looking at this sentence, there are a couple of things that could be hurdles to any student who's struggling with language, and really all students can benefit from engaging in a juicy sentence conversation. So you see this is a pretty lengthy sentence. The syntactical structure is pretty complex. There are 3 different components of this section to dig into. It also includes some metaphorical language and some really difficult and unusual vocabulary that you can dig into. So the juicy sentence protocol includes step-by-step instructions for how to find juicy sentences within your existing text, and then how to structure these conversations to help students understand how the different features of language and structure within sentences contributes to meaning. So I know you haven't seen the protocol yet, but I thought we could do a little sample experiment to see if you can pick out a juicy sentence in a passage. So we have a sentence highlighted in yellow, one in blue, and one in green. If you can go to your question tab and say which sentence you would choose to discuss via juicy sentence structure discussion with your class, which is the most ripe, based on what we were just saying, the features of a juicy sentence are, which is the most ripe for discussion.
All over the place. There's some yellows, there's some greens, there's some blues. I see them all.
All right. Well, I think that is the correct answer because it was kind of a trick question. I think there could be arguments made for each one of these sentences depending on what you want to focus on. So if you're focusing on vocabulary, you're looking at word parts and taking apart words to find meaning. You might choose one sentence over another. My personal choice would have been the yellow sentence. I think there's a lot to dig into in terms of those really complex and unusual compound adjectives. There are 2 in that sentence. It's also a question, which has the quotation marks, and this structure of questions can be particularly confusing for English language learners. And then if you look at the sentence that directly follows it, it says, she teaches, And pronouns are a particularly difficult part of English language for English language learners, or if you've studied a foreign language yourself, you know that the pronouns can be particularly confusing. So this would be a good opportunity when you're looking at that next sentence, she, and say, who is she? And then you refer back to the person who just spoke. That could be another good learning opportunity. And there's also good words in there, analysis from the root analyze. You can talk about root words and different parts of words. So a lot to dig into there, but with the other sentences as well, there are similar features that you might take apart. So everybody's right. So now I'm going to talk about a adaptation that we've made to our academic word finder. If you're not familiar with our academic word finder, it's a digital platform where you can copy and paste any text that you have into the platform. You select your grade, and then it generates a list of the academic vocabulary along with student-friendly definitions and sample sentences. So as we were thinking about using this in terms of teaching vocabulary to English language learners, a couple of things came to mind. First, if you look at this example, it found 37 words, and that is far too many words to teach through in-depth instruction with English language learners. There's only so much time in a lesson to devote to vocabulary, and if you're going to really dig into and do in-depth vocabulary work, we really recommend that you only do 6 to 8 words within a particular lesson with a particular passage. So we created a set of criteria, and we actually pulled it from the Institute for Education Sciences, that allowed you to go think about all these words that you have pulled. And you can actually go to the next slide, Joni. Yeah, there we go. So if you look at a passage and you see 37 words, you can narrow them down by looking at this set of criteria to figure out which are the best, which are the most fruitful to study in depth with your English language learners. An additional part of this that's now featured when what you just saw is available to you after you generate a word list, and this as well. After you generate a word list, you have the option of looking at these additional activities. So we're thinking you've now generated a word list, so the next logical step is how do you use the word list? What are activities that you can do with your English language learners to reinforce and build that vocabulary? And I don't have time to go through all of them right now, but this is a resource that is actually included. This is one of the handouts that you got as part of this webinar. And then if you do go to our academic word finder, enter a passage and generate a word list, this will be available to you as well after you to use it with that word list that you've generated. And lastly, we have an additional guidance document about writing and discussion supports. And you heard Sarah reference a couple of these throughout her part of the presentation. Sentence frames, word banks, and signal words. These are all different components that can be used as access points for English language learners to enter and participate fully and authentically in writing and discussion activities. And things like sentence frames are very tricky, and they're a little bit of they're a little tricky to use because you don't want to over scaffold or take away opportunities for students to be creative and students to do the work. So we have a lot of nuanced instructions to help you think through when is it appropriate to use a sentence frame, when does it help a student access content and engage with the content when they otherwise couldn't, and when is it time to pull back or scale back or alter the kind of sentence frame you use. And so that's all in that document. The URL is there for you to go investigate that for yourself. And I think that's all. Yeah.
All right. Well, as promised, there was a lot of amazing information and great resources shared in tonight's webinar. We do have a couple of minutes remaining to pose some questions to Claire and to Sarah. And Sandra has been monitoring the question box throughout, so I'm going to turn it over to her. Feel free if you have any specific questions right now for either Claire or Sarah in terms of what you saw tonight, to go ahead and type those into the questions box right now. And Sandra, why don't you moderate a couple questions for us?
Great. So I've been keeping track and I have a few, and not sure that we'll be able to answer all of these, but we'll give it the best shot. One, which seems pretty easy, and I probably should know the answer, but I just wanted to make sure with Claire, is the books that we use for the Read Aloud project. Teachers need to purchase those books. Is that part of our kind of like generally available books that's how they were selected, or is there other kind of support for the use of the books that are in the Read Aloud project?
Yeah, so the Read Aloud project books do need to be purchased by the teacher. We're hoping that a lot of these books, they were chosen because they're very commonly used Read Aloud books. But we actually don't have the rights to recreate passages or recreate the text from that and share that with you, unfortunately. So you do need to purchase the books. However, if you go onto our site and you click into one of our Read Aloud project lessons, we do have an option to purchase the text at a discounted rate if you don't have the text.
Great. Okay, and another one which I didn't know the answer to, and I don't know if it was outside the scope of this project, but quite a few people asking about the view on providing bilingual dictionaries for students. Was that part of the research that went into this project?
Yes, and actually, I wish I had my annotated bibliography ready to share with you because we do have some research on that. And bilingual dictionaries, so there are a lot of different dictionary-related scaffolds that you can employ. Bilingual dictionaries is one, and then also student-friendly dictionaries that are in English is another one that you can employ, or having students create their own visual glossaries and either taking from a bilingual dictionary or taking from a student-friendly English dictionary and making their own visual glossary with vocabulary specific to a particular text. Those are all great. But again, you want to be thinking, as one of the overarching goals that we considered as we did all of our adaptations, you want to be considering what the goal of the particular resource is that you're allowing students to use a bilingual dictionary with. So if you're thinking, this is particularly, I think, relevant to assessment, but you want to be thinking about if you're simulating an assessment and you're trying to simulate what students will be doing on a summative assessment at the end of the year, you want to make sure you yourself know as an educator what the accommodations are that will be available to your English language learners in the context of assessment. So if you're in a state that does not allow bilingual dictionaries, then if you're trying to simulate an assessment situation, then it probably makes sense not to have that scaffold available then. But in general, if you're working just with a lesson, absolutely.
Great. And questions are just pouring in, so we might have to follow up on some of these after the webinar. But another one that I saw come across is, how do you suppose teachers should support a deep focus on meaning, building meaning, vocabulary, grammar, without sacrificing the time needed for decodables and foundational skills?
Yeah, well, I feel like someone has been on one of our previous webinars because foundational skills is not a planted question. You definitely don't want to skimp on foundational skills, because I think that's a big part of having allowing students to have the skills they need to engage with future text, to do the decoding, to understand word parts. But I think, I didn't have time to go into it today, but if you're thinking about vocabulary and thinking about the elements of other scaffolding techniques that are included with some of our resources, I think you'll find that there's a lot of overlap between foundational skills and the scaffolds that we're recommending for English language learners. So if you're thinking about morphology, or you're thinking about taking apart words and using word parts to decode a word, this is something that's highly recommended for English language learners, and it's one of the criteria for if you're trying to choose among many different words, how do you narrow it down? Looking for interesting features of a text that you can break down. So what does it mean to have this letter combination together? What does it mean to put a prefix or a suffix like UN in front of something like fortunate? So if you put UN in front of unfortunate, what happens? It becomes the opposite of what it was. All these different features that you can, when you're taking apart words, are also very useful for English language learners. But I think there's definitely a lot of overlap, and I definitely wouldn't say, take away from the foundational skills section in order to focus more on the meaning making, or, I don't have a graphic organizer in this section, so I'm going to take away 5 minutes that I would have spent on foundational skills to use a graphic organizer. I think what you want to be thinking about when you're trying to be strategic and judicious in the scaffolds that you choose, think about what the original goal of the resource was. So you could always add a graphic organizer, or you could always do something to make, to help students make meaning. And it can be tempting to say, like, I don't want to ever say that students shouldn't be understanding what they're reading. So it can be very tempting to say, like, I better do a graphic organizer because otherwise I think they're going to be missing out on something. But if you're doing something like fluency packets, then the graphic organizer is not to make meaning of the passage, is not really the goal of doing fluency work. You want them to understand what they're reading, but having this sort of deep, close reading of a text, something that you would do in a close reading lesson, but really unpacking it and trying to make meaning of every single word and doing this deeper reading, that's not the goal of fluency work. So don't integrate something like a graphic organizer there when the focus is on something else like fluency or foundational skills.
Great.
Claire, I would just add.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just really quick. I just wanted to say I've seen a lot of teachers, in order to keep that balance, with more of the focus in ELA on nonfiction and trying to get to the deeper meaning in the vocabulary, incorporating more of that with science and social studies so that they still can preserve the time for foundational skills.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I know we're running out of time, but it seems like, as so much of our work, there isn't one prescribed set of things that works for every student. So some people having questions about the A versus B passages, and I would use this terminology instead of that terminology. I think that's true for lots of things that we talk about in supporting English learners. And, everybody should kind of like think about best practices and then make decisions based on, I think Claire made a really good point. What is the purpose of the lesson? What is the goal of the lesson? And we want to support student learning that goal and making sure our scaffolding doesn't interfere with their opportunities to achieve those parts of the lesson. So I will turn it back over to Joni to kind of close us out.
Great. And thanks again, everybody. We'll do our best to answer some of the other questions that we weren't able to get to one-on-one with you. So real quickly, again, we hope that you'll join our network if you're not already part of it so that you can continue to engage in this kind of learning with us. We're excited to have so many new folks on. We also would love to hear about what you're doing. If you're using some of these resources or you end up using some of these resources, we would love to hear about that. And we have a form, our Instructional Advocacy Action Form, where we collect that information. So keep an eye out on an email for that as well. And then finally, we hope that many of you will be able to join us again next month. Our Core Advocates webinars are on the first Wednesday of every month at 7 Eastern Time. And next month, May 2nd, we'll be talking about the ELA mini assessments and using those for assessing literacy. So thank you once again on behalf of everybody presenting tonight. We appreciate all of you, and we hope you have a great night.